Íreach chlár fáistéise don sco se thugaí na Chéad Fight Clubs.
I want to talk to the men of this parish. A blackthorn stick, raised and brought down on the back of another man's skull, is creepy as harm.
Tréimhse ana dhéan, saoil eile bhí an uair sin. Gholling na gnádaíine a lán.
Bhealach ó cinál pressure cooker a bhí an éire ag an am sin, bhí duine faoi bhrú, bhí an bochtans go fór lehan, bhí duine díreach marachtáil ar éigen ar na fermacha, bhí bora faoin déanra, bhí na duine faoi chois.
Ag tús na néomhíse dé gan éirí. Tháinig fás ar ceann na gnéithe is doracha is dar na tíre seo. Ré brúidúil fuilteach míthróceach na feicsiníochta. Fíor óga a dheampig isteach na drodarí fuilteacha. Níos fíochfar an ná mar a bhí fiú in nú áireach ag an ná. Bíad son na Chéad Fight Clubs.
Bhí na faction ceangailt le clown áirithe a méthása dá morachúchtún á rianach bheith gáil le faction áirithe dá búrcochtún ó Cnéideach bheith gáil le faction heile.
We had several groups. You had the 3-year-olds and the 4-year-olds.
Bhíoch na Black Hens agus na Magpies ann, bhíoch na Paulines agus na Gowls I Dubradán na Hess.
The Rieskevalles, which was slightly over the border in Doon, and you had the Coffees of Newport.
Bhí na Cummins a Zone, bhí na McGraths agus na Carews I Gashel.
Bhí a daonra a bhad níos mó féin dua ná mar atá inniuh. Chiaigh sé sin go raibh cónaí ar gcuoine go háirithe daoine bochta féin dua I neceile daoine eile ní a bhéon phríomháideacha saon agus chothaigh sé sin ócáidí go bhhéiteach daoine bheithe tríd is tócha.
You had two types of people. You had the people who on the margins were trying to get land, and the people who had enough land were trying to get bigger, and there was a competition for land as well. And that created its own violence.
Maram bheoch an targad a gut, ní bheoch an talamh a gut, maram bheoch an talamh a gut, Jofa bás.
Tá tú caint ar hir aber a bhí cho bocht le cuidas na tíortha is bochta ar dain an neamh. Ar nó na daoine bhóchta ar fad is daoine gan léamh ná scríomh bhíanta. Ní raibh an bhóta cá agus béidir go meach anam na boundaríana nó an riacha ach thar sin ní dónam go meach an rid sin ólasecha ar céhí a ggót.
Éon an tríomh có as na cúisteanna ná dul chun glí, agus bín cúise bháin gur handar le chéile agus gur códar I monachrin.
Tá meach achtra, tá meach dúnharú an son beidir go ducha pólíní nó go ducha an tarm. Ach de gan ná hí cuasaí anna agsúil agus de choigh sé sin deisne de bhaoine túr fair fríd.
It was sort of lawless in that, and they resorted to their clans for support. It had a grievance or a grudge against anyone.
Tá dóg fé go héir a bhí a go túis, go gafaí machar an mórtó, go gafa cá raitha, cá dhéanatha, chacht in éigent, lacha le cabhrá ainge, uornta dhéanatha éad chun tú héna chosint.
Leis na congéalacha seo, tháinig fás ar an bhréigean ar luas lasrach faoin dua. Dás grúpaí cuachtacha, buinte móra nó factions, a heich a bríon lena chéile ar lán éananig. Ní umra scáil gan díomháil a bhís na trodanna seo, ach marú agus gortú ar scála fíochfar.
First of all, there was the noise of sticks banging off sticks of the opposition. Then there were sticks banging off the heads of the opposition on both sides.
The women fought too, they, not physically, but they fought with stones, and some would put a stone into a sock. You couldn't strike a woman, so they had sort of a free license to do what they wanted to.
Bhí sé annach asú leis an rudí bhíon lucht siúil an lai an nniuh nuair a bhíonn sé de tríd. Bhí sé fíochfar chuid is na trídanna a hála.
Apart from the blood pumping out of heads and other parts of the body and things like that, but the shrieks and the screams, apparently, people who heard them would never forget them.
Bích go raibh fulling tú fásach a baint leis, a líon troda bí a hé le sciláir. Dá le scríonóirí ar nós William Carleton, bhí gá chomór leis go raibh Eleonóirí ag dul heimpel I múna na sciile seo sna scoile na scarta.
It's a fierce system, and it's a very simple system. Once you're aware of the basic strikes and parries, it's not a very complicated system. There's not an awful lot of moves or different strikes, or it doesn't take you 10 years to learn it. It's very direct, very fast, and it's extremely efficient. There's a single stick, and even within the single stick, you have a pugilist system, like a boxing system. You had a single stick that would have been used like a sword, and you also had the dos batteriet, which was with 2 sticks. 2 sticks was more often used with the masters. They would fight each other in one-to-one combat. As in a faction fight, there was scarcely enough room to swing 2 sticks or to get 2 sticks going.
Ceapan híon go raibh nósbhreachtáire a buint leis na faction nuair a thos níidir, gur sais tlaí garbha a bheithiad. Agus gnúsáideach daoine bataí agus go raibh sciáire a buint le daoine a bhóla. Ach nach raibh sé gceist go marófaí daoine, go ninfí dochar agus an son go meach trídeile ina dhéag sin ag an géad éana chaile. Ach ní mar sin a lean thar na blianta gur chothaigridas na hachrann seo nimh agus gur chríochnaigh sé mar ócáidí bhí methe ó smacht ar fad.
People would travel the country in order to get a good fighting stick. They were very carefully selected, very carefully cut. They were polished. They were kept up the chimney to be seasoned.
Sometimes they would put a little bit of lead in the end of the stick, a loaded butt, and a tap on that on the skull would split it immediately.
They were seasoned either with poteen or with brandy, and they were greased over and all the rest of it. A huge amount of trouble went into preparing sticks.
There was an art in holding the stick. You hold the stick with your thumb so you wouldn't be blown out of your hand. Also, you hold the stick about 1/3 in, because they were going for the elbows, and if you got tap on the elbow, you release the stick.
Bheadh pís a lethar cheangailte heimpel ar chéal na láimhe leis an bata bhí a tríd a ragla go ní móch sé an lámh uatha.
Because if you lost your stick in the middle of the faction fight, you were in absolute real trouble. You didn't have a hope. The hats worn by the faction fighters, they were generally a size or two too big for them, but they made sugans of hay or straw, which they lined the hat with. That was to take the blows of the sticks.
To kill somebody, you would have to impact a great force to the head and to a vital area. So by and large, when these fights began, the early intention was to knock a person to the ground, concussed, and then the person may not be assaulted any further. Conversely, of course, if they were assaulted on the ground repeatedly with a heavy object, like a weighted shillelagh, then they would receive repeated blows to the head. And at that point then, death would follow if the blows were to vital areas, resulting in fractures of the skull, bleeding within the brain, and laceration of the brain.
Van an tribloor geleer, beg nach gegoon ile talv. Dine hookig ferm, eslemach dine kurmacher moher. Nu, dine hourig fienische, de luchten lee, maar jouw dine yin rodegend, es een lee derlichen hoedrage. Når vi har triblod en år, det kan også enochen na lesene behoersles en triblod. Maar kurtine dine macher moher, agus hookach dine en talven son.
Is kan stoppen gerlisha, wanneer groen komen na white boys die brodaren. Wie sie maar aimeko, na tinontahe a kossend on het hier niet haloon, agus skauracher graberi a hoog talven a dine elle a kahagama. Ach gan trúa ná trókre dainge a bhrischen lí, ní a vada a varne miente úsle seo.
Bhí na curne a dhin na buchli bána, agus luch na factions, gur buchli bána iad, bhí ar úfásach. Gur gás in bilboa in eice le cahar limaní. Hóg trúrar fer mór talabes a churig fé seacht in amachar mór, fé seacht teilach. Agus mar íag an trúrar go. Agus ní hwan son ach millig corp na curb, agus garag an count of an hwan did.
Glése die soes in ede ban, kon dolle machsen ihe in mun a good scale.
De bredar na hosna Chéad, dertar hart a bur shellé. Heiris tempel san ihe, agus heiris guri de tihe leis na grabéri, agus herring áiris de machid, agus ar is lees a gof. Ní a bhéon trúa chudas na dine, bhí an dágrán cruálach. Bhí an lí cruálach, a bhí món an de buch Libána cruálach chumá. Chosan siad na túhánig. Hása gom gur dhéanad a chuirn nó fásach, ach nuair a bhíidir san heimpach, go minic bhí lucht an lí cúrmach sar a osna siad a cahabh dine machar a mór, nó gnéanad díist é góra na túhánig.
Buinte múra by anna carawati agus na shen vestine, a hosnig I dibrodaren hes. Fyróga gan múrán talún by anna carawati, agus fyr a móri le muin a vís na shen vestine. Idar hogti agus a cúig agus hogti aga truca. Is beg éanach I dibrodaren nús na déise a bhí gan brín idar an dag rúpa seo. Buinte a bhí agartha, dílis, agus le na rialacha héin.
Sean tradiisiún na buch Libána a bhain leis na carhar. Sé sin an ó merte gan éon rud a rála ainge faoin obair a bhí siúla go. Gan a bheith góil agus gan riamh bheith sodar ní na núsal gan géile agus mar sin de. An drám eile na seanna vestana bíidir sásta dulgarí lucht an glí, bíidir cardúil leis na húnéirí, cardúil leis na agents, bíidir sásta duldí na Paulíní, agus mar sin bachúis leis na hachran.
Ach bhí taobhile I bhfad níos brúdúla ag na buinte seo chomá.
Chag ban in Mali Roilig in son amach leis an clown, hánig fóhíar na talún ó agent agus cha sé an díon tí an uair den tí le píce agus bhí sé ferring agus dúirt sí an lá bheith tus a thart in Roilig, be sé chudunna de lá an lá chahag mis agus na páistí amach ar mór. Tá an clown sa heimpel fós ní lua me na henimnacha den duine a chur na dtíine amach ar mór. Bín an chuir bheits ar fad dar leis na factions agus dar leis na buchlaí bána. An té an égóir ar bhaintrach, ní a bheith rud amháin an anda an bás. Bhí ferhail ag crosar an ídóran san Tomás McCallte bennim den an fídóra thugad éistear. Agus bhí sé bhí bó bre agus bhí sé móthar gar sé daoine ar mór ag dóchlog maidin. Agus chu sé machchas túr fear bhí ann ar bhain capal le hata íortha. Agus chud ar ceistear cara bhfuil héad seo. Agus bhí an fídór lára cad bhí géist gur carhaid iad as tibredáin. Agus bhí an bhaintracht híos I maiil na ngáil in tí eile thug daoine tíde. Agus dúirt sé leis an túr ar fear doch síos tí bail na ngáil agus caint leis bhaintracht. Agus chaisí héanaar a glúna sa macha agus dúirt sé leo ar sundéin am aragan fear. Bhí an fear sin mar a bhaníhe sin marach an bhaintracht.
The last inhabitants have said goodbye to Inishark. They're going to the Irish mainland, giving up the struggle against storms and isolation that often last for weeks on end.
I could see in my parents' eyes every day they lived that their heart was broken for their island.
Their heart was in Shark. They didn't want to leave it, but necessity was forcing them to go.
I believe they felt they could have a better life anyway.
Inishark, Boss, Ilan, La Colle, TG Car.
Bhí taobh das náthúil a baint leis sa bhéidir go mbeadh sé ar siúl le líon féile nó lán fátrún nó lán éananig sa counter sa go speisialta I counter na néise bheith fá caint ar cultúr na naoine ar cultúr na tuatha nó ar cultúr na cosmhuinter. Nuair a hagad na daoine le chéile ar lán éananig bhí é an cabhaimseir bhí có agus de bhíoch bhfuilí á thabhairt agus de bhíoch trid agus bachar amán mar cuid den cilúra san.
People use the occasion to let off steam. Local disputes and differences were carried and brought to these fairs.
Bhí rírá ó fásacha lán éananig, ní bhaith fí éon doch an ceangaí anamh ná bath díal nó airad leis an trídi bhíoch ar siúl.
Ar slí eile bhain sé le curaniúil na féinúlachta is dóilam, go rá na firóga a rá seo muidna is buine muidna leis an gceantar seo agus is muidna na basas sa cheantar seo.
Agus heich fear suas lár an éananig, haringíoch sé an cóta ar an talamh, agus an té a heasach ar an cosógan son, os nóch an tríd.
Are you thinking now? Are you thinking? You're out there in some field. You go into that fight with your weapon of evil. And before you have a chance to turn around, somebody has brought their weapon down on your skull and knocked you senseless.
In 1826, In Kilfeacle, a faction fight took place between two clans, the Hickeys and the Hogans. But that's not the real story of the clan. My grandfather's grandfather, John Kelly, and his brother, Black Din Kelly, were the cause of the faction fighting in this area.
Tháinig asiantas os rud go raibh pósa le teacht.
Black Din Kelly was to marry a Luby woman, and he didn't marry her. This was a tremendous insult to the Luby family, and it started an unmerciful row. The Hogans backed the Lubys, Stokeses, and other families. The Hickeys and the McCarthys backed the Kellys.
Vís ag achéine gombeoch an aracig an éanach I Kilfeacle. I dús aimsre, boláidre na Hickeys dertar. Ach de caiisiad an bhaidin ag ól agus ag scuile chuid gúnaí san éir agus a 3 o'clock sa tránóna ní raibhann taspach ná an fuinnamh chéanánta agus de tháinig na Hogans an sin agus de bhuail na Hogans iad.
Bhí an tríde barc I Kilfeacle agus bhí drám Hickey leidir agus an drám ó muintear I Hógáin leidir. Deirtear gur raibh 600 daoine an barc.
Ach ní tú tháinig a bháin a maríir. Níor a bhéon áit an taonach, fiú do dhaoine iltas an aram.
Bhí duine ann dar bhenim do McCarthaigh.
He was a conscripted soldier into the Napoleon Wars, and he was begged the night before not to come to the fair at Kilfeacle. It wasn't a healthy place to go, and he replied, saying, "I saw more men dead at the Battle of Waterloo than I'll ever walk to the fair at Kilfeacle." The day after, he was dead himself.
Bhí sé ag siúlháile nuair a tháinig dromdas na Hógánig agus gur chaisiad bhí sé de crús de cloc leis agus leag siad é. Agus an sin bhí béanas bata I ceandas na Hógans agus tháig siad Charlie McCarthy. Agus léim Matthew Hogan 3 huaire agus é na lí an dalamh.
It was a bitter event for the McCarthy family. When they buried him in Kilpatrick, a local graveyard. But the Hogans weren't finished with him. They came later at the stealth of night and broke the headstone in Kilpatrick, which can be still seen to this date.
You're lying there, bleeding to death. You're dying. Everybody around you is too busy. Too busy avoiding blows. Too busy deliberately killing each other.
Given the rudimentary health support available, the people died from later complications in large numbers. Individuals would have suffered large scalp lacerations, which went unrecognized and bled. And they subsequently bled to death because of the bleeding arteries. They might have been treated electively with cauterization with a sharp knife or a hot knife, subsequently very rudimentary type of treatment. So I imagine there were unfortunates, who survived the head injuries, survived the concussion, with awful disfigurement of the head due to large areas of the scalp being removed as a result of assault.
Bhí mórtas clinge anna háartach I mesna tú a tháinig ag an amse. Agus má bhí clownpáteach I bheicean, bhí na fir go léir a bheith olamh chun dul amach a tríd.
There was a travel writer visiting a town in Limerick, and he was standing on the riverbank. And while there, a young fella came running along the riverbank, followed by a man who was much older than the young fella. And the travel writer intervened and asked him what was wrong. And the old man said, "That fella is my son, and he has refused to fight in the faction fight with us." So that was the kind of influence that was exerted on that man's son by his father because he hadn't stood his ground.
The delayed effects of skull fractures, even smaller ones, must have been devastating. If you used a dirty piece of wood with resulting pieces of wood embedded in your scalp with a fractured skull, those were lethal injuries because of the late consequences. They often led to infection with sloughing of the scalp, fractures of the skull, meningitis.
Na Spalpini hánig cúing abuir ó Chiarí agus ó Limnach. Well, bhí cuitíomh siúd in ó muíocht leis muinter Hibredáin, leis glábhathe Hibredáin. Agus ba vinnig tríd mar jaolar sin. Go raidis istíthe go dtí an sciból nó an tígan na míocht na Spalpini ina gola. A thugdar ráha dó an sin. Bheith glant amach as an áid. Agus dúirtar má haga míad ar eis rís agus gúilta fósan sa buine míad an lechlóstíd. Agus bhí sin dúna go leor, agus an sin dúirt siad. Agus má haga míad ar eis an tríobáta agus gúilta fósan sa buine míad an lechlós eileadait. Léiríonn sé cé có díana sa bhí an saolartha, go éanadí sé sin.
Ag an tús, ba rid le maidí a bhí géistins na brínta. Ach tar réir mar a bhédig chuacht agus bhrúdúlacht na bheicean, go mór mhór leis na carhataí agus na sean bheistine. Banna gúsáid as gunaí uair le sí ferme, nó péarad go bhaid faoi dochar a dhéanamh leis.
An cuidas módas na gunaí a bhí an, bhí siad cloch hinne flint lach. Bhí got ar dós an púdar a churas deach tríd an béal, agus an sin bhí bata púdar chun é a brú síos, agus an sin an orchar a churas deach, agus an sin an trigar a dúsáid. Bhí sé maul agus dechar, nuair bheocht daoine ag teacht thar timplairt ní rá ach an sean sa bháin. Bhí píche acu, bhí forcanna acu, sin forcanna firma, forcanna fér, lai éon úris gur féidir lá fuair a chur air.
Uanta ghearadís an bád an spell agus cheangalídís ar bathe, bheith sé sinna go chumá.
They used big long sticks with a steel spike in the end, really a spear, and drove it straight through the opponent.
Díon siad scris, díon siad dochar, níor a bhéon eagla go, agus sa sé beagnach do creidtha níis nó léon tóna na cúntas agus mar sinnta an sórt dochar a dhéon siad.
Chuidir díiste lán gunaí, agus bhí an guna bheithe bhí chun a sanamh seartcon. Guna fóléireacht agus ghearadís an barla, agus bheith sé stig féin cosóga chu.
Bheith sé níos éasca ar choirí bholach, dá méach an baril a geartha siar ach hús in aiceile daoine bhí sé éfachta go leor.
The worst faction fight in Ireland was at Ballyhay Strand in Ballybunion, North Kerry. It occurred on St. John's Day, 1834. This fight was to be the fight to end all fights, to get rid of all the bad blood between the factions. There was a tradition on St. John's Eve and St. John's Day that In conjunction with the races, the faction fight would take place. There would have been a festival atmosphere, some entertainment, alcohol, food. The races really were just an excuse to have the fight. The crowds had been gathering for a number of days beforehand. The Lawlers and the Mulvihills on one side, coming from Oireachtaí Connor, and we had the Cooleens coming from Clanmorris. They would have travelled overnight, early morning, and taken prime locations. We had boats with supplies of stones. The plan, of course, was for the Cooleens and the Lawlers to use the stones to fire at the opposition. The fight became very brutal.
The police, they were terrified, you know, going to these faction fights. One particular sub-inspector asked the sergeant the night before his first engagement, "What's this like?" And the sergeant said to him, "Constable Thompson had his arm cut off there last year with a scythe." The police did not have permission to fire shots over their heads. If they fired, they had to fire to kill or injure somebody.
Very difficult for the police as well, a foreign police force, soldiers, to enforce peace. And they felt if they did get involved, the crowd would turn on them as well.
It was known well in advance that that fight was going to take place. If the same information was available to the Gardaí at the present time, you would have the Garda right squad on standby, and you certainly would have some army battalions as well on standby.
Skull fractures of their own, even the simple ones, must have led to a lot of morbidity, because a major skull fracture would cause a contusion of the underlying brain with a lot of bleeding and hemorrhage, and total weakness or inability to move the contralateral side of the body. So a blow to the left head with a fractured skull was lethal, making you unable to speak and making you completely paralyzed on the right side of the body. You can imagine the rudimentary country doctor trying to repair these skull fractures. He was reduced to taking out spicules of bone and trying to suture together the scalp over the wound as best he could.
You can imagine the shock and the sadness. People saw what was erupting in front of them. In the sheer frenzy, the boats capsized. People literally got trapped under the boats. They were drowned. The overall feeling was shame, definitely, at the sheer madness. Fellow Kerry people fighting amongst themselves, actually killing each other. Such waste of life. If a head of a household was seriously injured or dead, who was going to provide for them?
Cuireann sé náire beidir gaí náire go rómar mar sin má bhíomar. Ach buineann samhlaíocht leis an trí a dhéichamíd siar ar an óma há caite. Is máling a chaolú go rómar mar sa nó mar siúd. Anna bhinic an tuiscint a bhíonna going ar an saol is tuiscintí sin a iúnacht an lá tainge bhain. Ní tuiscintí mad le saol na naoine in St. Hampshire.
Bhí tíiseach I gceannas gach faction. Léachra múra a bheall na firóga lena gcuid cuachta. Bhí dílseach den gceanara seo riachtanach don mó ebre a bhí acu.
Tá thugadíist téarmí míleta ar a hen gomininic de bhíoh captéin ar na Caravati nó bhíoh captéin ar na Seanna Vestana.
Cuide có thugadíist mór, go méid ís dílis den captéin, agus go dúchadíist amach nuair a gléfiartha. Johan captéin gléach 8 seachtú 8 chéad leis tí de barúntacht bháin, chun dul éis go dtí an éanach.
Ní daoine cúlacha, iad san na chuiginnteach daoine bhí I gairí amach sort gagaí móra bí iad san a bhí sásta airí amach a gcuine an drí.
Sort duine go raibh spríd nechatíonnta bant leis bí an tíiseach. De gan ná uaireanta léach ná túla bhí ann. Duine láidir, duine go raibh spríd a bant leis, duine ná géalach. Uaireanta macabóige le fermúr. nó duine go raibh anna cháil ar I bróistí. Bhí duine bhána I mthain slíomh gúin is cheantar sin Tomás ó fóilú benimda. Agus bhí cáil ar sin mar ceanara ar na Carwat. Thugan ó chéiring, thug sé fianna sé gine fóilú, agus crocha go fóilú lá éananig ar go nach buí. Hartar 806, 807 na mar sin. Agus bhísigh na daoine san áit cé thugan fianna sé ó chéiring. Agus bhí sé gobar an mús a fáirt lá, agus tháinig Bert Carwat, léasta mar bhaná legad ré. Agus an san fuair ar clocha den clí agus in den brúsca dá cheann. Bhín an bás a fuair sé.
I want to ask you a question. Have you forgotten what a mortal sin is?
In 1820, a priest, Father Laffin, he said his first mass in Capper White, and he had made a mistake of denouncing faction fighting.
You're lying there, bleeding to death. You are unconscious. Gan ahena, gan urlaura. Who's going to whisper the act of contrition into your ear? Everybody around you is too busy avoiding blows, pounding each other with their evil weapons. There will be no point in saying, "May God have mercy on your soul." Your soul is already lost, even though your heart may still be beating its last beats.
They boycotted him. They barricaded his church and they would let him out. And he disappeared from that day out.
Dinne mí darúd beidir go minic chuma nar a bhéon dlí dúchas a chaun mar a déir fáin san éocédéag. An dlí a bheach ar éireannig an uair sin ná dlí hasanna agus dlí na hímpaireachta.
I think that the magistrates at the time were quite happy to see the Irish killing each other rather than taking out their vengeance on them.
Dúirt pí lei sin, dúirt sé sin ceandas na cúisna bhí leis an ag mródúlacht a bhí d'Iberdána, the apathy on the part of some landlords and the help and connivance of others.
Bhí cúisina áirithe go mbeadh an rud a gairí níos brúdúla agus go raibh sé ó smacht. An son deire go raibh gá pólíní a haingtas teach sa scéal agus na rudaí a chur fé chois.
Má dhéon na húdaráis nebhar den na factions go dtí seo. Tar éis an trod a fásach géirí in 834 agus fiosrúcháin Lord Melbourne na lean. Ní a bhéon rogha ach an láimh láidir a úsáid chun sciúr seáil na factions a stop. Bhunaigh Sir Robert Peel an Royal Irish Constabulary sa bhliain 1836. Ach is Sir Thomas Drummond forú nína héireann a hit an ragaracht an feib a réiteach.
He had a huge love for the Irish, and he felt very bad to see the Irish killing themselves. And he said, I'm going to put an end to it. And instead of each province doing its own thing and having its own attitude to faction fights and law and order, they were all brought under one control. From that time onwards, the faction fights were really going down, because any place where there was a faction fight, anybody seriously injured, anybody killed, the file had to go to the Lord Lieutenant of the day, the very top man in Ireland. And he started asking questions if things happened that shouldn't have happened.
Napolini an uairsin san éoché déag de chuirse anna olc orthasan gomíoch tacla chéile com mórsan ag éirnig. Bhí scóra ortha gomíoch daoine tacla chéile agus bataí a coc comá so hanadar nuas anna róm na brianta an uairsin comá.
Bhí sais cógólaíocht beidir idir an chléir, idir na pólíní, agus an sunar ná bhí daoine sa phobal a bheith a gcuine bheile héad. Hálótha maná, mórthacha, seandaoine, cuidas na ladna bhí pórtach an aglarach a siúd go marófaí a glán mac.
An rud a bhí a chur in argainge ag an sasanach go rámar asar meabhar, nó go rámar buile agus go raibh sé an am a gin smachta chur ar in héin. De chuir an pátrún agus an téanach agus an marga agla agus I miní ar institúdí an stát a bhí dírig na daoine a hagas agus a smachtú.
Bhí na heas a hard aspig féin a feith céad bliain I géirig srí na cor ar na factions. An doctor Padre go lécha an nád aspag is gohfuil animus mógé I naig na factions, chuir sé brúr na daoine airí asta. Bhí sé fíg forládar in naig na factions. Dúirt sé, the curse of the living God will come down upon your guilty heads. Dar nó ní closin tú a le héad I dréad litar na naspag ag an am seo. Bhí cuasa spredáilte ar siúl I nimmer gúr agus ag deire an cuasa spredáilte tháinig canarí na factions sús ina mertas ina mert agus os córad ar le aspag de gheolladar go salúnta go nairóidis as na factions.
Bhí tionachar ag an aglis agus na húdaráis a raib na faction, agus bhí deire I techt le réna brianta. Ach bhí atharú olmhúr búilte le saoil na túthe ó 18 amach, agus uafás I bhad níos measa I techt.
Tréis tamil, an eicime a bhí a dul ar an éanach agus a bhí páirteach ins na brianta, sinné sé an drám céanna a dhimig ar an mádbán agus a fuair bás leis an ocaras.
Our population was halved from 8 million to 4 million, so he reduced the number of people that were available for fighting.
Tréisian an gort díal cuidas na húnéirí sin an talamh le daoine eile. Agus ní raibh an brú chéanna ar chúrsaí talún agus ar chíosanna agus san tháinig léhananta na fíníní agus tháinig coganna talún. Díogar níag ceisna talún ar sé mar chnáb sparring ag daoine.
In sa bhíhuí sin san, sé teachtareacht an náisiúnachais a tháinig chun tosaigh. Bhí daoine I mula na Gaeilge agus ag mula cultúr na Gaeilge ach bholadar rudaí áirithe agus bholadar darúd a dhéanamh an san ar nethe eile. Tháina brianta ar istócha ar ceandas na rudaí san.
Gus chumáile sin bunaí cumann luach leis Gael agus an gcuimhid ar próistí agus an chud ar díomh ar fát na himmarthe.
Bhí rialacha I bhaimmen sin agus sort rivalry bheann idir na próistí cuir sé sort srín agus cabhaigh sé sin déirthing chun deire a chur leis na factions.
Chéad caige bliain níos déanaí, a tithe níos ar an dalamh a bhí mar chnáb sparringe idir na clanna. Ach tá ír smíd an gang culture seo fós beo, s na cáthracha agus na bailte múra, agus I meas grúpaí áirithe den loch siúl.
írs mé áirithe de beo I gcónaí I gunteachs aber achrannaí cluichí pelle, go mbíonn Loch Lanún na fórna a bríon le chéile ar ócáidí. Tá írs mé áirithe is seo beidir ins na bríonta bhíon ar siúl idir chlána an loch siúl. Tá cuid an tradiisiún an son.
What was happening in the settled community long ago was fights over land and over stock and over right-of-ways and patches of water. And it's, you know, they would have fought with the very same weapons as the travellers would have fought with, as we've seen in recent years.
Cé go raibh ar sin sean áthracha éilte I tríd le madí, bíonn a líon trod a gaalach seo dearút ag an saoir. Ach níos den chéad úr ó aimsir na scoile na scarta, há daoine óga á ghabhla maríos na déise.
Everybody always looks elsewhere, and looks outside of the country, you know. This country is rich in martial arts culture, and for some reason we've turned our backs on it over the years.
Caithfear churs an áireamh go bhfuil an tread agus a bheith breanú ar treideanna. Is cosúil go rud é atá fréamhaithe stiad an duine.
Ní scaoile míad éonrad isteach a curach isteach ar an héin ar an measa hágaing ar an héin in sa látán bhán mar ghuioine carta nuíseacha sibhialta.
Level níos daine, tá míad go léir pórtach in san rud ar thug an socólaí Norbert Elias an civilizing process, agus sé sin go bhfuil cúltach going leis ais cultúr a bhí níos garibhe agus a béidir a bhí níos fuiltíí, bíon agláringe ribhríon agus foréigen agus fuil agus mar sin, agus bhí sé sin go léir lárnach ins na faction.
Tá stanna héan lán de scéalta den tais sin, níos fuide siar. Agus fiúháin níos gira going héin an coga caharga, ní malin cuine ver, ní mala dína cain faoi.
Na daoine a bhí pórtachas na faction, níor bhíad na daoine bhóchta tríd a stríd, agus a slucht siúd, beidir gur daoine go raibh cearcad órlog gur daoine meanachnach bhíonta, agus beidir dá bhhair sin go raibh leisce áirithe ortha chur síos nó bheith bródúil as beidir seanachracha nó sin seanachracha a bhí pórtacha rud a bhí brúdúil agus garbh agus nach raibh deas.